legislators, they know the law inside and out, but a lot of time they don't have that deep industry knowledge. And I think being able to tell the story of intermodal and represent our members and say, here's what's happening, and also here's maybe a way to better think about addressing this problem.
Freight doesn't move in silos, and neither should the conversation. Welcome to the Freight Table, a monthly podcast from the Intermodal Association of North America, connecting data, government affairs, and voices from across the intermodal supply chain. This is your pulse on what's changing now and what to watch next, where intermodal comes together.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Freight Table. I am David Garofalo of IANA, and I'd like to welcome you all today to another discussion with my colleagues. Today we are joined again by Lucine Marvin, our Vice President of Government Affairs here at IANA. I'm very pleased to have her back. I didn't torture her enough first time around, so she's back for more. It's also very happy to be joined by our resident economist and colleague, Andrew Seibold, who joined us a few months ago, and we're very happy that he's on board, and he's here to share some of his wisdom and some of his insights. And I think coupled with Lucy's insights, we really have quite the dynamic duo here today. So I just don't want to have them sit here and look pretty. Let's go ahead and get started with some questions. So, Lucy, you were here, we talked about a month ago. You had a very full plate with a lot of activities going on. And since then, the world has certainly not stopped revolving. And so the landscape has certainly shifted beneath our feet. And so I'm wondering if you might be able to just update us on kind of what you're seeing and hearing. And Andrew, it's your first time with us. And so kind of give us a lay of the land. What are you seeing out there in the marketplace? And what are the tea leaves saying? And I'll let you divide amongst yourselves how you want to answer.
Andrew, should I just jump in with a?
Yeah, go for it. I won't fight you for it.
Okay, let's start on the hill then, shall we? Yeah, David, last time we spoke, there was a lot coming down the pike. I think right now where we are is in a phase of, okay, where is this all going to land, right? Oh. You'll recall we were talking about cargo theft and supply chain fraud, which is a really big priority for IANA, top priority for IANA. And I've been on the Hill a lot since we last spoke about Combating Organized Crime and Retail Theft Act, which is really, I would say, a bicameral, bipartisan. The support remains. It seems to be very much unwavering. The concern was that, with the issues that the country was experiencing with DHS, that Corca may be in some kind of jeopardy or maybe slowed down by all of that, because there will be a cargo theft, retail crime coordination center set up within DHS under the bill. But I can say, and I'm really, really pleased to report, I've been, talking with all of these offices on the Hill in both Senate and House side. And again, the support seems unwavering. So I'm feeling very, very encouraged by that. House Judiciary Committee voted the bill out of committee to the full House back in January. So we're really now in this phase of, okay, where is everything going to land, given that we're in an election year and we all may be familiar with how Washington works, but the time to legislate is running out, because eventually it becomes all about the reelection. So understood, I think that the very top priorities are the things that will get the most attention. And what doesn't shake out from that's just going to have to either get reintroduced in the next Congress or not. We'll see. But I think the big things for IANA, cargo theft and supply chain fraud and surface transportation reauthorization, and not Hill related at the moment, but administration related I think would be the independent contractor issue. So starting with cargo theft and supply chain fraud, IANA has endorsed CORCA, as we talked about before, the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. And that has really, I'm so encouraged by this because I think the concern was that with the challenges that the nation was seeing with DHS, that might in some way jeopardize Corca's progress, because under Corca, there will be this retail crime, cargo theft coordination center. But what I'm seeing, and again, so encouraged by this, which to me just goes to show how our lawmakers really understand the importance of this legislation and understand how cargo theft and supply chain fraud is really come to an all-time high and is at intolerable levels, and that something has to be done on the national level. So I think that's encouraging. We've been on the Hill a lot, just talking to anyone and everyone who will talk to us about this issue. So feeling good about that. Where it ultimately will go, I'm not sure. The House Judiciary Committee did vote Corca out of the committee. It is waiting to be debated before the full House. And in the Senate, which is not unusual, the bill still is sitting in the Judiciary Committee, but the Senate does move on things slower. It is a more deliberative body. That's not unusual. They have said to me and assured me this is a top priority, that they want to move things as soon as the House moves things. In the House, they're saying it's a priority for them as well, because it just has such bipartisan support. So fingers crossed on that. I'll keep you guys all posted on any kind of movement on that front. Surface transportation reauthorization. Chairman Graves of House Transportation and Infrastructure has said that he would like to do a markup on surface transportation reauthorization as early as next week when the House is back in session. I, with all due respect to Mr. Graves, who deserves it, I think it's ambitious. I do know that it's all being worked on very hard. We have the greatest minds working on surface transportation reauthorization, but I wouldn't say it's ready yet. And the question is, will we have even a bill to consider by the time the current IIJA expires on September 30th? So again, stay tuned on that front. As I said, we're kind of in this, okay, where are things going to land phase, which just takes a little patience. But in the meantime, you do find areas where you have control, and that is just getting up there and educating. So that's what we're doing. We're just continuing to stress IANA's priorities. So I would say those are the big things on the Hill. The independent contractor issue is still very live at the Department of Labor, as we discussed in our last conversation, David. IANA will be sending comments to that in support of the notice of proposed rulemaking that's before the Department of Labor now. Comments are due April 28th, everybody who's listening. And basically, these rules are going to bring everything back to the Trump 1 era, which is independent, in favor of independent contractors. Biden moved the needle more towards in favor of employers. So we're all in the independent contractor camp, since we've got independent trucker members and we want them to be able to keep working the way they choose to work. So feeling encouraged about that. So I would say, in a quick nutshell, that's the big stuff. On to you.
That's awesome. I want to just have one question about the retirement of the distinguished gentleman from his seat in Congress. Indeed. What does that do to the process? Does that make it? Do people want to wait him out, or do they have a deadline? But does that deadline necessarily mean, like, what happens if they don't pass something by September 1? What is the ramification?
Well, so what happens if they don't pass something? And it expires September 30th. So if they don't pass something, what they'll do is just go back and get a series of extensions. It's a lot like the budget, where they get a continuing resolution. So they'll get that extension sort of equivalent for the surface transportation reauthorization. It will be at the current levels, which I'll remind our members and our listeners that inflation has since the passage of the current reauthorization, inflation has really had a major impact on how much it costs to construct anything. So, that's one of the IANA priorities. And I think something that everybody in transportation is beating this drum, that those levels are going to have to be higher. We're not going to get the same level of infrastructure construction at the current levels. It's something like 50% more. So that's significant, and that's going to hamper any kind of progress for sure. And yes, Chairman Graves has said he will be retiring. I have to give House Transportation and Infrastructure such credit because they really are, they work so well together. I don't think that necessarily there will be, any kind of gaming in a big political way around Representative Graves' retirement. I think they really do. It is actually just like so refreshing. I encourage anyone to watch their hearings because they really do volley things between Republicans and Democrats. I just feel like they're all like kind of rowing together. I mean, obviously there are things they disagree on, but it's just like good old fashioned collaboration. It's encouraging. So
that's awesome.
We'll see.
I love to hear that. You don't get to hear that very often. So that is refreshing.
No, you don't, but they're a good example, I have to say.
Okay, Andrew, you've been very quietly listening, very polite.
Sorry, Andrew.
What's going on in your world? Tell us what we need to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, the economy, right? There's really nothing ever happening there. No, I kid. So I will, I guess, preface this by saying take everything that I am saying with a huge grain of salt, because obviously the conflict in Iran and the resulting oil shocks have kind of changed a lot of the dynamics that are at play. And, it's happened since the end of February, but it takes a long time for these type of things to show up in the data. So we're kind of still analyzing like a historic window of like before the conflict, and so obviously huge grain of salt, but overall the picture before was not too bad. We had the pretty large freight recession. Q4 2025 wasn't very good. It was about down 2%, but it did end the year on a high note, largely due to domestic volumes. So that was kind of encouraging to see that, despite the tariffs causing imports to be suppressed, there's still enough like domestic demand to kind of have a substitution effect there and keep things positive. For 2026 thus far, we're actually up 2.7% year over year. And it's kind of remarkable how much the slow grind towards normal has been happening. If you overlay kind of the first quarter of 2026 onto pre-pandemic, pre-tariff days, it actually tracks quite nicely. So we're seeing a return to more historic, more normal patterns of freight movement, which is nice. Hopefully that will survive, but I doubt it with the issues going on with oil prices. Trucking obviously is going to come under pressure from that probably the most. I've been playing around with some models lately and trying to see, historically when there's been an oil price shock, what kind of happens between intermodal and trucking. And, obviously it's not good. But I will say that intermodal is a little bit better insulated just because of, the nature of who ships intermodally and the demand structures around that. So trucking sees a pretty big pullback. We see a big pullback, but not quite as big. And then actually about 3 months out, we start to see a little bit of share shift coming from trucking to intermodal. So that'll show up probably at the end of Q2. I imagine the oil prices will remain elevated, just because of the sheer damage that was caused by the oil infrastructure, even if the ceasefire holds. So that's going to have a drag on kind of things going forward. And then the big question is like, what happens to the consumer, right? Because America's economy is largely driven by consumers. So, you're going to have inflation because of the oil prices and the cost to ship everything. But, can the consumer weather that? We saw in 2024, the consumer was surprisingly resilient. Things held up. But, now we're seeing a labor market that's a lot softer. No major layoffs yet. GDP is still increasing at a decent rate. I think they're projecting 2.4%, which is, kind of defies logic right there. But, does that translate into consumers, right? Because it's largely concentrated in healthcare and things like that. So it's not like an across the board rising tide, raises all boats. It's more concentrated. So you're going to have a lot more winners and losers in the economy, and it's going to be a lot more fragile. So that's the nutshell, I guess, for me. I'm trying to keep things positive, but yeah, there's a lot of unpredictability, and I think we're going to continue to see a lot of volatility in the markets, and how things move forward, which I guess keeps it interesting.
Well, and I think that's really isn't that the overarching theme of everything that we do and everything that our members are doing? Is there is, as much as, I think Intermodal loves predictability. I mean, it works best when it's got a constant stream of freight moving through the system, just like we'd like to have a constant movement of legislation and regulatory activities when we kind of just at a normal pace when we can expect things. But we know the world doesn't work that way. So, aside from kind of the big issues, where are the areas that, and this can be to both of you in your respective areas, where do you think the biggest disconnect between kind of policy and regulatory issues and intermodal sits? What is it that people don't quite understand? And when they're looking at legislation, I know that Lucy, I think you and I spoke last time about how it's well-intentioned legislation can have unexpected ramifications.
Yeah. And
until we get in there and in front of them to tell the story, they don't quite understand it. And Andrew, same thing. I mean, it's numbers can say one thing, but until you really get someone to understand what they need, they could have a very different repercussion when looked at. So where are your areas that you think that need the most explanation when it comes to intermodal and your respective audiences?
Yeah, I'd say on the economic side of the house, right, the biggest kind of self-inflicted wound that we've got is tariffs, obviously. Tariffs do serve a purpose, I will say that, but the key is how they're implemented, right? So they're essentially best used to protect nascent and kind of growing industries, right? So if you were to place like very tailored tariffs on things like semiconductors, some of the AI stuff coming out, that would have like a very beneficial effect because it protects the small industries while they're still trying to figure out how to be profitable and allows them to kind of grow up before they're exposed to the evils of the world, for lack of a better analogy. But, when you have these broad-based tariffs that are kind of just based on trade deficits that oftentimes exist for very logical reasons, right? Like we're not growing a lot of bananas and coffee in rural Ohio. So, Costa Rica is going to have a little bit of an advantage there.
Coffee from Ohio. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I love Ohio. Just let's.
Yeah.
I love our states equally.
Yeah. So yeah, it's one of those things, right, where the classic Adam Smith, right? Everyone has a comparative advantage. When we focus on what we're good at and then trade for the things that we either can't do or can't do as well, that's when everyone kind of wins. Tariffs are going to, well, they already have. I was looking at labor data recently, and I mean, the job market since April, the Liberation Day tariffs, the labor market hasn't been the same since. And there's no real good reason why it should be so depressed other than the tariffs. Because I think a lot of people... sorry.
And to that point, manufacturing jobs, the sector didn't really grow the way it was anticipated.
No. And that's part of the problem too, right? Is, tariffs kind of come in and, they have an immediate effect, right? They cause prices to jump. But in the long term, they function kind of like any other tax. They cause job loss and lack of growth. So the idea I think the administration has is, it's a good intention. They want to bring manufacturing back to the United States. The issue is that, we have not had a growing manufacturing sector since the 80s. Since then, so much has changed and so much of it has actually been automated. It's not exactly like most of the jobs have like one-on-one moved to a different country. It's even there. So many of the jobs have just been automated that in a realistic way, even if we were to keep the tariffs in effect, it would take so long and cost so much money to get that sort of industry knowledge and get those things stood up that even in a perfect world, it would take decades to start to, produce things at like a roughly comparable cost advantage here. I just don't see it happening, right? And, with AI and everything, you have this, probably acceleration of automation, which is going to lead to potential more upheaval. And that's where I think we lose sight of the policy, like where the emphasis should be placed. We're trying to put a Band-Aid on a very deep wound rather than trying to avoid getting the deep wound in the first place. I think the best policy response would be to kind of help people transition, help people to, have a safety net so that they can transition into a new, growing industry, right? Because like the axiom is that, for every job that's destroyed, there are new ones created that we had no idea would exist in the future. Think about people who are prompt engineers and things for AI, like that job just didn't exist, 5 years ago. So allowing people to transition and kind of have time to make those transitions, I think is key. And that's where, folks like Lucy come in, where, legislators they know the law inside and out, but a lot of times like they don't have that deep industry knowledge. And I think being able to tell the story of intermodal and, represent our members and say, here's what's happening. And also, here's maybe a way to better think about addressing this problem comes in huge because, at the end of the day, Republican, Democrat, like we all want America to be the best version of itself that it can be. It's just a question of it takes all perspectives to get us there. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we kind of lose track of that with the political winning points rather than focusing on like, how do we fix the issue? So that's kind of my soapbox moment here. But yeah,
it's a good soapbox.
Yeah,
Lucy,
thank you.
Do you want to get on your soapbox?
Yeah, always. Where shall I start? Yeah, I echo everything Andrew just said in terms of, our lawmakers are generalists. Of course they are. How can they be anything else? So I don't think anyone should have the expectation that everyone who's up there is some expert in every single thing, right? That's our job. That's why we exist, right? That's our job. So I will say, and again, I feel like I should be wearing a House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee t-shirt today. We are in good hands, nation, with them. They are not generalists, right? They do know their stuff. They know transportation in and out. But, the individual offices don't. They're not going to. And I think that's where the main disconnect is, just to piggyback on what Andrew's saying, really is they don't understand, one, what intermodal is. And not, I don't mean this in any kind of pejorative way, but they don't. Why would they, right? Again,
sure.
So they don't understand what intermodal is to begin with. They also don't really fully understand the interconnectedness of the supply chain, whether that be the domestic supply chain or the global. And I just was in a meeting yesterday where the very smart staffer asked, when will we start seeing the impacts of Iran in our lives? To which I answered, you already are. We already are. Look at gas prices. Everything's going up, right? Yeah. it's impacting every mode of transportation right now. I mean, even like, let's step outside of intermodal for 1 second. I was just look at airline tickets,
yeah.
right? And, there will be less flights that aren't profitable, that can maintain these routes where, there's really slim margins. Those are going to go away for a bit, probably not forever, but, still, right? Everybody's got to make these business decisions. So I think that, and again, intermodal, as we said, I mean, it's impacting everything. So I think, again, it just goes back to that education piece. That's why we're here. And we just have to keep driving those points home, right? It's going to, continue to impact us in ways we haven't seen it all yet. So I think that's the disconnect, is getting those dots connected.
Yeah. And I think it's a disconnect for the general public and right in general. I mean, we see things as we all have been talking about, is we see things kind of in our own silos. And so, if you go to buy an air ticket, then you see it. But if you don't travel by air, you don't see it. But you do see it if you go to the gas station. Mm-hmm. And we all know we go to the grocery store. And we've been seeing it at the grocery store. And so, we have to recognize that, what the forces are that are in play that are kind of affecting all of this. And it is, again, it all comes down to the supply chain, right? It all comes back to supply chain. It all comes back to how it gets to us. Because we don't produce, as going back to our earlier conversation, we do not locally produce. I don't grow my own food, which is a good thing because it's very hard to, grow Fruit Loops, but
that's not for lack of trying, though, right?
Yeah.
But
no, but you do bring up a good
major food group.
Yeah. You do bring up a good point there, though. Like even the idea of producing things locally, it's true and also not true because everything is traded globally, right? Like we're not North Korea, so it's not like we're shut off from world trade. So even though the U.S. is like a net energy producer, right, we are still subject to those same pricing forces, right? So if a oil company in Texas can get a better price by shipping their product to Europe, who gets most of their oil from the Middle East, of course they're going to do that, right? That's them making a business decision. So, even if we try to insulate ourselves by protecting these industries and trying to bring things back that we're not as able to produce, it's still going to expose us to risk globally. And I think that, with oil prices in the future, Iran's not going anywhere, I think. And the Strait of Hormuz is now, they've tested it and it's a good lever for them. So I think that markets are going to be more fragile going forward just because, there's always that threat that, should something happen, they can then shut the spigot off and cause prices to jump and chaos to reign.
It's a lever. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think highlights the need for kind of diversity in kind of all things, right? You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. So the more we can add new energy sources, the more we can add new supply chains, suppliers, locations, the better we're able to tread a middle course overall versus being so reliant on one single pathway and one single anything. I think it's a good lesson for everyone moving forward.
And I think it's especially, it's a total tangent yet related is kind of what we see in California in terms of our motor carrier members who are still implementing EVs, fuel alternatives. And they even though the mandates aren't there or as strong, they're still investing. They're still making that investment because they understand kind of, you can't have your eggs all in one basket. And so they have created kind of this little microcosm of really, really great forethought about what the future will bring. And I just think that's, something that we should really applaud in terms of kind of making those business decisions that are that allow you to have multiple areas of operation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that brings us, I think, to my final question, which is looking forward. So when we gather this august trio together in a month, what should we be looking for over the next 30 days? What do you think? Look in that crystal ball. What do you see coming up? What should we be watching for?
Well, I have always said that being an economist is a bit like being the weatherman. No one's going to remember when you get it right. They're definitely going to remember when you get it wrong. But unlike the weatherman, I have fodder for when I get it wrong to be able to explain, what I missed. So yeah, for me, I would say, one of the good signs I see going forward, just to try and keep it positive, is the manufacturing activity. So, even before 2025 and kind of the issues around tariffs, manufacturing was kind of trending upward. We were having like a slight recovery. And then due to the tariffs, there was a bit of a pull forward effect. So there was a lag, but now we're starting to see it kind of pick up a little bit, which is good for intermodal. It's a demand source, that domestic demand source that I think can take up some of the slack from our imports. But, the question is like the magnitude of that, with increasing prices, not just for fuel, but I mean, there's so much stuff that relies on oil prices, everything from fertilizer to plastic packaging to medical devices, pretty much name it, and it's going to have some sort of, plastic or oil component to it. It could potentially cause this manufacturing rally to flatline. I think that kind of remains to be seen, but it's definitely something for our members to keep a watch on, and we'll be keeping a watch on it here at IANA too, just because it's such a good leading indicator for intermodal freight demand. And then the other kind of thing I'll be looking at is just to see the mode shift from trucking with the oil shock. Like I said, I don't anticipate diesel prices to come down significantly anytime in the future, even if there's an era of good feelings and, the Strait of Hormuz is open. There's just been so much damage to the infrastructure there that I think prices are going to remain elevated for the foreseeable future. And, that will feed inflation and kind of cause volatility there. So we'll see kind of how that develops. And then I would say probably the third thing that I'm looking at is the labor market overall, right? So there's growing consensus that we actually might be in a labor market recession. There's something called the Sham rule, where I won't bore you with the statistics, but basically you have like 3 roughly periods of increasing unemployment on like a average basis. And that's been going on since essentially April with the announcement of the tariffs. So there is indications that we're in a labor market recession, and like whether that will spread to other sectors and kind of cause like a consumer pullback, which would lead to like probably a more broad overall recession. I definitely think that's something to pay attention to, because, we're seeing growth right now, and I think we anticipate growth here in the future. It's just a very fragile growth. So, what little poke is going to upset the apple cart, so to speak, is anyone's guess. And I won't hazard that guess, but yeah. So, I anticipate overall 2 to low 1% growth, but yeah, it's fragile.
It's on tape, so
Yeah. Feel free to call me up and tell me I was wrong. Hey, I'm doing my part by predicting low growth. Watch, it's going to skyrocket. So,
Lucy, how about you? What do you think? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, like I said, we're sort of in this stage of where things going to land in a month. I don't know if we'll really have any answers to that. Time is flying. There's a lot of stuff happening. So careful to speculate. Oh yes, Cork is going to pass. And this, I don't really have any indicators that we'll have such movement on this stuff. I will say though that, we're in the next appropriation season for 27. The president has indicated what, his administration wants and where spending should be focused. And I think that, this is just going to be another opportunity for IANA to get up there and educate and stress how important it is, that the supply chain gets the funding that it needs and all of these different issues, again, like cargo theft, hopefully something will pass, but there's a lot more to do on that, right? There are a lot of buckets on that. There could be more legislation on there, on that topic. So for sure that could happen. But, that's an opportunity for us to just get up there and, educate and lobby for our members' interests. So we'll see how the next few months shake out. I do think time's going to fly between now and the election. And once we have the results from that election, there's going to be a reorganizing, I think. So we'll see. There's all kinds of predictions about which chamber will turn, which chamber will not turn. So I will stay out of the politics of that for now. I think that's best.
Well, we'll save that for a future episode.
Yeah.
We'll keep people guessing.
Yeah.
But I do have to say that to all of our listeners is that if you like what Andrew and Lucy are sharing, you have an opportunity to hear them in person and ask your own questions at our business meeting in May in New Orleans. May 4 to 6. And so it's not too late. You still have time to register. We'd love to have you there to participate not only the discussions with Lucy and Andrew, but with all of your colleagues, all of your intermodal colleagues, and hear what's going on in the different regions of the North American intermodal market. And so thank you very much to Lucy and to Andrew for your time and your insights. As always, a pleasure. And yes, you have to come back. So you don't have a choice. So I'd like to say thank you for your time, but I kind of, I got you.
We can't refuse, right?
But seriously, thank you very much. You two are very insightful and very knowledgeable, and you make me. I learn something from both of you all the time, so I appreciate that. And till next time, thank you all very much, and stay safe.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.